My name is Fonda Sutton. I was 32, and I had just driven 640 miles into an ambush disguised as a party. My husband texted me that Saturday. He said he had a surprise. I brought our 13-month-old daughter and a diaper bag, because that's what you bring when your husband says surprise and you're foolish enough to believe him. When I opened my own front door, every relative he owns was already sitting there in folding chairs, and not one of them stood up. He dropped a stapled lab report onto the coffee table like it was too dirty to hand me directly, and told the whole room our daughter wasn't his. My mother-in-law pointed at the door and screamed at me to leave. And then, right behind me, the front door opened again. I need to be honest before we go further, because I know exactly what you're hoping for. The person who walked through that door wasn't there to rescue me. Nobody was riding in to save me. But here's what none of those 30 people knew: that lab report wasn't fake. The lab hadn't made a single mistake. And in about 6 weeks, I was going to stand in front of 90 people and explain exactly why that mattered. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, the channel for the quiet ones. The people who didn't defend themselves in the room, because they were too busy writing down the date. If that's you, stay with me. Drop a comment, and subscribe, because this one earns it. I'm a captain in the United States Army. 9 years in, commissioned through ROTC at Penn State on a scholarship, because nobody in my family had money to send me anywhere else. I'm a logistics officer, which sounds like paperwork and is actually the opposite. My job is knowing where every item is, who has it, and exactly when it moved. 2 deployments behind me. I brief soldiers at 5:30 before they've had coffee, and that job teaches you one skill: say the true thing first, and everything else after. I'm stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. My daughter Marlo lived there with me, in post-housing, and spent her weekdays at the Child Development Center while I worked. My husband Grady stayed in Bellwood, Pennsylvania, running my grandmother's hardware store. The Army has a name for that arrangement, geographic bachelor, and about a third of the people I serve with live some version of it. He'd drive down when the store allowed. I'd drive up on leave. 640 miles between those 2 front doors. 10 hours, closer to 11 with a toddler who has strong feelings about her car seat. Hold on to that number. It's the whole story, and I didn't know that yet. Sutton Feed and Hardware has sat at 41 Main Street in Bellwood since May of 1966. My grandfather hung a bell over that door the week it opened. It's still there. My grandmother, Ali Sutton, ran the counter for 40 years, standing behind it until she was 86. She died in 2023 at 89, and her will left the building, the 40 acres behind it, and every bolt of inventory to me. Just me. Roughly $610,000, if you're the kind of person who counts love that way. My husband was exactly that kind of person. Here's the part one have to say honestly, because leaving it out would make me a liar. For 2 years, Grady unlocked that store every morning, built the online side from nothing, landed the largest agricultural account in 2 counties, and doubled its revenue. He was genuinely good at it, better than my grandmother had been near the end. And the sign over the door still said Sutton. In September of 2025, on my attorney's advice, I placed the store into a single-member LLC with me as the sole owner. I left the paperwork on our kitchen table for 4 days. Grady saw it. He never brought it up. I'd armored the building in September. What I hadn't understood yet was that you can't put a 1-year-old into an LLC. I learned that the hard way, in March. The message came on a Tuesday, about a week before everything happened. Come home Saturday, I've got a surprise. In the Army, we have a different word for that kind of message. I didn't use it, because my husband was suddenly sweet to me for the first time in 4 months, and I wanted that so badly I refused to look closely. He asked what time I'd arrive. I said probably 4. 2 days later, he asked again what time, exactly. I told myself that was excitement. It was a cool time. I took 14 days of leave, starting Friday the 13th. Marlo screamed from mile 400 to mile 470, somewhere in the mountains where the radio dies. I pulled into a gas station outside Somerset and fed her animal crackers off the hood of the car, and she thought it was the funniest thing that had ever happened to anyone. I remember that better than almost anything else from that day. It was the last hour of my old life, and it was good. I reached Bellwood at 4:10. 9 cars sat along Ridgely Street, and I remember thinking her and never finishing the thought. I walked through my own front door with my daughter on my hip, and the room was full. 30 people. My mother-in-law's whole side. Cousins I'd only met at our wedding. 2 of Grady's uncles, all sitting in folding chairs, the metal kind, stenciled with a church's name on the back. Sit with that detail, because I didn't, not for another 9 days. Nobody borrows 30 folding chairs for a surprise. You borrow 30 chairs for an event. No cake. No balloons. Nothing on any counter said celebration. Pine sat in the middle of the sofa, hands folded like she was at a funeral. Grady stood. Nobody rose when I walked in. 30 people watched a woman come through the door after a 10-hour drive with a baby on her hip, and not one of them stood up. That's the part that still lives in my chest. Grady pulled a stapled packet from under a magazine on the coffee table. He didn't hand it to me, he dropped it, so it hit the wood with a sound. Then he said it, not to me, to the room, "She isn't mine." 30 faces turned toward me at once. Nobody gasped. None of them were hearing it for the first time. I was the only person in that room finding out. Pine lifted her arm and pointed at the door. "Leave right now. Here's what I did." I said nothing. I didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't ask a single question, because 9 years in uniform teaches you that letting people watch you bleed is a tactical error. I stood there in silence with my daughter on my hip, and I listened to 30 people decide that my silence was a confession. I could hear it happening, and I couldn't stop it. Grady picked the packet back up. Behind me, the front door opened. A man in his 50s, windbreaker, clipboard. He didn't look at Pine, or Grady, or the folding chairs, and I've thought about that since, because it meant he'd done this walk into a living room many times before, and had a personal policy about where his eyes went. He looked at me instead. "Fonda Sutton?" I said yes, because I answer when somebody says my name, a habit I've had to make peace with. He put the papers in my hand, said quietly, "I'm sorry," and left. A divorce complaint, filed 9 days earlier. Clipped behind it, an emergency custody petition. My husband had filed for divorce 9 days before he ever swabbed a cheek. Sit with that math. The lab report wasn't the reason for any of this. He didn't discover something devastating and file in heartbreak. He filed first, then manufactured his prop. 30 of his mother's relatives sat in borrowed chairs and watched a process server hand me papers in my own living room, at a party I'd been invited to under false pretenses. You've been waiting for someone to walk through that door and save me. So was I, for about 4 seconds. Nobody did. That's not how this one goes. I know exactly how long I stood in that house, because I checked the clock in my car twice afterward. 90 seconds. That was the entire ambush. I walked back out through 30 silent people without a word, and a woman I'd sat beside at a Thanksgiving 2 years earlier pulled her purse tight against her leg as I passed, a gesture I'd only ever seen strangers make. I buckled Marlo into her car seat, and my hands were completely steady, which scared me more than the room had. 9 years of training, and my body ran the checklist while the rest of me trailed somewhere behind it. Then I backed out of my own driveway. My daughter had existed in that house for 4 minutes of her entire life, and she was already Exhibit A. I never took her back through that door again. I drove 12 miles to a motel on Plank Road in Altoona, laid her down in one bed, and sat on the edge of the other with the bathroom light on so I could read. People always ask if I brought this on myself. I didn't. Every step I'd taken was correct, and the facts are the entire reason this story ends the way it does. The store had gone into a single-member LLC in September, sole owner, me. The inheritance sat in a separate account under my name alone. In 3 years, I never mixed a dollar of it with anything marital, no car payment, no vacation. I kept every receipt. My separate property was untouchable, and I knew it. So did he. He'd seen the LLC paperwork on our kitchen table in September, and within about 9 seconds understood the store would never belong to him. So he stopped aiming at the store, and put his hand on the one thing no filing cabinet can hold. You can't put a 13-month-old into an LLC. There's no form for that. I read the custody petition 3 times that night. The argument was clean, professional. It never called me names. The mother is absent. The mother is subject to deployment. The mother resides 640 miles from the child's extended family. The mother's presence is intermittent. And then, in the alternative, this is where it turned surgical, the child is not of the marriage. Attached, an affidavit from Dos Merrill, who'd worked the counter since 1997, who'd taught me to cut a key at 11 years old, who cried harder than I did at my grandmother's funeral. One line. In 2 years, I have seen Captain Sutton in the store on 11 days. I scrolled back through 3 years of leave calendars, half hoping to catch him lying. He hadn't. 11 days, exactly right. Dos had sworn to a fact, which made it the single most dangerous document in that stack. You can cross-examine a lie. You cannot cross-examine a true sentence. You can only stand beside it and hope somebody asks a second question. Near 4 in the morning, I forced myself to look at everything from where Grady stood. 2 years, 700 mornings, 6:30 in the dark, unlocking the door, brewing coffee in a pot older than I am. He knew every farmer in 2 counties, knew which ones were behind, and carried them anyway, quietly, the way my grandmother once had. I never taught him that. He'd saved a dying store with his own hands, not because he loved me, but because he loved it. And his name was on nothing. Not the deed, the sign, the LLC, one sheet of paper in that building. He'd seen, in September, that everything he'd built was sealed away from him forever, and said nothing about it for 6 months. I understood him completely. I wish I hadn't, it would have made this simpler. He wasn't wrong about the store. He was just willing to put my daughter on a coffee table in front of 30 people to take it. That's a different conversation, and it has no other side. Bellwood holds about 2,000 people, and I'd been gone 9 years. That week I learned neither fact protected me at all. 4 days after the ambush, I walked into the pharmacy for diapers, and 2 people I'd known my whole life found the shampoo shelf endlessly fascinating. A woman I'd sat beside in 4th grade turned her cart around at the end of an aisle, not quite fast enough to hide it. We both knew Pine had been busy, church, the salon, the diner on Wednesday nights. My mother-in-law was smarter than people gave her credit for. She never once said the word affair. She'd just get a certain look and say, quietly, that there had been a test, then let 2,000 people build the rest themselves. You don't hand a town the whole story. You give them the first sentence and let them enjoy writing the ending. By the end of that week, the verdict was in. Nobody ever said the word to my face. They just stopped saying my name. One thing, right here, because it's the reason I'm still standing. If anyone ever hands you a document meant to end your life, read the last page first, the fine print nobody bothers with. That's where the truth hides, because the law makes them put it somewhere. If that lands with you, subscribe. Dayla Prowse practiced family law out of a converted dentist's office in Hollidaysburg. She pulled a $4,000 retainer before reading a word of the petition, which I respected. She read it in 6 minutes, then gave me 3 facts fast, no comfort attached. 1. Jurisdiction generally follows wherever the child has lived the preceding 6 months, and Marlowe had lived her whole life at Fort Campbell, Pennsylvania might not even have standing. 2. The Service Members Civil Relief Act meant I could request an automatic 90-day stay as active duty. 3. My family care plan, signed 4 months earlier, laid out exactly who cared for my daughter, when, and why. Sitting there, I understood I was already winning, and it wasn't close, and I felt worse than when I'd walked in, though I couldn't say why yet. Dayla took her glasses off. Captain, you're going to win in June. That's not the same thing as this being over. On March 22nd, I drove to the store before Grady arrived. I have a key, I own that building, which I'd need to remind myself of more than once. I went around back, to the alley where my grandmother had kept 2 recycling totes since 2004, because nothing in that building moves unless someone dies. Near the bottom, folded but not torn, I found a white prepaid mailer from a home DNA testing company. The kit was gone, the return label peeled off, but the box still carried a barcoded kit ID. He'd thrown it out at work, not at home, where his mother might find it, which meant that somewhere in the part of him still functioning, my husband knew this needed disposing of untraceably. I'm a logistics officer. My whole career is knowing where a thing was, who had it, when it moved. Standing in that alley with a barcode in my hand, for the first time in 8 days, I wasn't afraid. The next day, collecting Marlowe's things while Grady was out, I found a showbox in the spare room closet. Divorce papers from 2003, Wendell and Pine Lennox. Beneath them, a wedding photo cut with scissors in one clean, patient line, the man removed, leaving only a 40-year-old woman in a white dress, laughing at something outside the frame. Wendell had left her in 2003 for a co-worker, 2 kids still at home, and she'd kept her half of that photograph for 22 years. She never hated me for who I was. She'd made her decision back in 2003, and waited 2 decades for a woman in a uniform to walk through her son's door. That lab report didn't convince her of anything. It gave her permission. 2 in the morning, March 24th. I found the lab's website and the box where you enter a kit ID. It asked who I was in relation to the test, not whether I had the right. There is no chain of custody on those kits. Nobody verifies identity, and that cuts both ways. I registered and downloaded the report, then read it from the bottom, the way a logistics officer reads anything. Page 3, tiny print. This test was performed without chain of custody. The identities of the tested parties were not independently verified. Results are not admissible in a court of law. The report wasn't fraudulent, the lab hadn't lied. His own paperwork admitted it could prove nothing about anyone. He'd used it anyway, because it was never built for a judge. Page 2, the tested parties table. Alleged father, sample collected March 9, 2026. Child, sample collected March 9, 2026. I sat bolt upright, because I knew exactly where my daughter had been that day. My leave ended the 27th, I drove home with Marlowe asleep for most of Ohio. On the 31st, at Fort Campbell, I pulled records. The sign-in sheet from the Child Development Center, March 9th, Sutton, Marlowe. In 0715, out 1732. My initials beside her teachers, a policy I'd rolled my eyes at for a year. The gate log confirmed my plate that morning. And Grady is always exactly where Grady always is at 6:30. Dayla's paralegal found the last piece within a week, a point-of-sale receipt from the store, time-stamped 6:41 on March 9th. 2 bags of feed and a box of roofing nails. According to his own report, the cheek swabbed that day was 640 miles from my daughter's cheek. The Army documents everything, the single most irritating quality of that institution, and it just saved my daughter's future. He needed a child's cheek, and his own daughter's was out of reach. So whose did he use? Here's what I refused to do: order another kit online. On April 6th, I drove to a collection site in Clarksville, Tennessee, and booked a legal paternity test, 6 times the cost, an entirely different animal. A collector I'd never met checked my license against my face, checked Marlowe's birth certificate, photographed us both, rolled our thumbprints herself, and swabbed my daughter with her own hands. I wasn't permitted to touch it. She sealed the sample and signed a chain of custody form. I countersigned beneath her. $525. Then the hard part: this only works if he participates too. Dayla sent a collection invitation to his attorney. He didn't show. She sent it again. He didn't show. So she took it to a judge. On April 9th, my husband sat in a strip mall office in Altoona, under court order, pale as paper, and let a stranger check his ID and roll his thumb onto a card. He knew the answer before the swab touched his cheek. So did everyone in the room. Same science as the $29 kit he'd thrown in my grandmother's recycling. The only difference, this time, somebody watched. The email came at 4:11 a.m. on April 17th. I read it standing beside my car in a parking lot on post. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Grady Lennox is not excluded as the biological father. I got in the car and didn't start it. I read the line 6 times, set the phone face down, and did nothing at all. I didn't send it to Dayla, my mother, Grady, Pine, or anyone in Bellwood. I sat and was right, entirely by myself, a skill I've been unfortunately excellent at since I was 19. Someone knocked on my window. First Sergeant Ruth and Petrie, who has never once asked me how my weekend was going. She looked at me for 2 seconds. You going to send that to somebody, or you going to sit here and be right all by yourself? I had one, on paper, with a seal on it, and it fixed nothing. That's when I finally understood what my husband had done to me. I called Dayla that afternoon. She wasn't celebrating. He would withdraw before any hearing. She said his attorney would read the result and the petition would evaporate within a week. No June court date, no judge, because he'd never intended to set foot in one. He filed on March 5th to make the story believable enough to tell out loud. The lab report was written for a living room. The affidavit was written for gossip. He'd built exactly enough legal scaffolding to hold up a rumor, then aimed it at a town of 2,000 people. If he withdrew quietly, that rumor would freeze forever at its worst shape. There was a test, and then they settled it. I'd win the paperwork and stay an adulteress in that town for the rest of my life. He never built a legal case. He built a story. You cannot subpoena a story. I can get you a court order, Dayla said. I can't get you a town back. I drove up the last weekend of April and walked into the store at 7 that morning. Dos Merrill was making coffee in the same pot he'd used since 1997. He saw me and went still. I didn't accuse him of anything. Dos, was the 11 days accurate? He looked at me a long moment. Yes, Then, back turned, in a voice I'd never heard from him. I know where every bolt in this building is. He never wanted money. He wanted to be seen, in the one building where he'd spent 26 years, by the one family whose name hung over that door. He'd told the truth in his affidavit, every word. My husband had needed a lie. Dos only needed a fact. Dayla filed our response the last week of April, attaching my 22-page family care plan signed 4 months before any of this. It named exactly who took my daughter if I deployed, powers of attorney, medical releases, my commander's signature. I didn't have it because I'm clever. I had it because regulation requires every parent in uniform to. Grady's attorney read all 22 pages and went quiet. Here's the arithmetic I finally did, with a calculator, at my own kitchen table. In 2 years, I'd set foot in that store 11 days. In those same 2 years, my daughter slept beneath my roof 631 nights out of 642. Both numbers, completely true. Dos had only counted one. Nobody, including me, had counted the other until April. If someone is telling a story about you that isn't true, don't argue with it, that's a hole with no bottom. Write down the dates while you still have them, then go find the room where that story actually lives. 7 weeks doesn't sound like a war until you've lived one. Midway through it, I stopped for gas at the Food Lion, and Pine pulled up beside me and rolled her window down. Her son's ring sat in another woman's jewelry box. Her granddaughter's photo hung on that same fridge. I'd hung it there myself. She said it again, the same rehearsed line. Leave right now. I said nothing, again. 7 weeks, and I hadn't spoken one defensive sentence to a living soul. Sitting at that pump, I finally saw it. I'd been calling it discipline. It had quietly turned into a habit, and a habit protects no one, it just keeps your mouth shut while somebody else decides who your daughter's mother is. Bright yellow flyers went up everywhere. Sutton Feed and Hardware, 60 years. Saturday, May 2nd, 10 to 2. Free hot dogs, door prizes, everybody welcome. My grandmother's store was turning 60, and I hadn't even remembered. Grady had. Dayla's paralegal later found the print shop invoice, dated January, 2 months before he filed. His attorney let one detail slip. At the anniversary, Grady meant to announce he was taking over full daily operations. He didn't just want the building. He wanted the whole town watching him receive it from a woman they'd been told was an adulteress. Between April 17th and May 2nd, I sat on the result. People have called that grace. It wasn't, it was targeting. I never emailed that PDF to a single soul in Blair County. 15 days I held it, because a true thing said in the wrong room is nothing but another sheet of paper. On May 1st, I printed 3 pages at the motel, 15 cents a sheet. Page 1, page 3 of Grady's own report, the fine print circled. Page 2, the sign-in sheet, March 9th, in at 0715. Page 3, My result, seal, signature, thumbprint, chain of custody. Notice what I didn't bring, his full report, the front page with the word excluded beside my daughter's name. I wasn't going to stand there and call my husband a liar out loud. I didn't need to. That's what paper is for. May 2nd was clear and 60 degrees. By 11, 90 people filled the store and sidewalk. A grill smoking. A banner on the porch posts. My mother lifted Marlowe onto her hip. Doss stood behind the counter. Pine poured lemonade like she owned the place, and her face did something I'd never seen when she saw me walk in. Near the seed bags stood Bristol, Grady's sister, with her son Miles, 19 months old. I hadn't arranged that. She was simply there, because it was the 60th anniversary and the whole town had come. At 12:45, Grady tapped his wedding ring against the counter. I noticed that ring from 20 feet away, and I've never stopped noticing it since. 90 people fell silent, and he spoke about Ully Sutton at 86 with a pencil behind her ear, about my grandfather and the bell in 1966, about a hard year for this family. Then, starting in June, I'll be taking over full day-to-day operations here. Real applause. A farmer shouted, "About time, Grady." Pine pressed a hand to her mouth. Then he looked across 90 people, straight at me, and smiled warmly. "And Fonda came out today. We appreciate her making the trip." 90 people turned toward me with enormous sympathy. They pitied him. That's exactly the moment I was standing in. I handed my daughter to my mother and walked to the counter. There's no microphone in that building. 90 people in a hardware store isn't a stadium, it's a room, and a woman who briefs at 5:30 doesn't need volume to be heard in one. "Grady." He turned, smile still fixed, braced for a scene. "On March 9th, whose cheek did you swab?" "What?" I didn't repeat it. That was the only nerve this entire ordeal required of me. I'd waited 7 weeks, 4 more seconds cost nothing. In those 4 seconds, 90 people watched a grown man fail to produce a single name. That's all it took. Not the papers, those came next, but they were never the real moment. The moment was a man beneath a sign bearing his wife's family name, unable to answer a question that only required a name. Then he tried. She's not well, she's been going through, and I set the first page on the counter. I laid all 3 down, face up, on the wood my grandmother had stood behind for 40 years, naming each one slow and flat. Boring is the whole trick. Page 3 of your report says the test had no chain of custody, nobody verified who was swabbed, results aren't admissible in court. You read that in March. 1 beat. The sign-in sheet from Fort Campbell, March 9th Marlowe, in at 0715. 1 beat. That's 640 miles from this counter. 1 beat. This one's mine. April 9th, court ordered. A stranger checked our IDs, took our thumbprints, sealed it in front of us. AABB accredited lab. Same science, same everything. Then the only sentence I let myself have in 7 weeks, this one has a chain of custody. I didn't read the number aloud. It sat there, face up, and Abel Ross, the same farmer who'd shouted about time 4 minutes earlier, leaned over and read it himself, then straightened and looked at Grady. Every person in that store watched him do it. That's what I'd come for. Not the paper. Abel's neck turning. Pine set the picture down and missed the edge. It went over. She came apart in the middle of that store, 63 years old, at the 60th anniversary of a business her family never owned a nail of, screaming that I was a liar, that she'd known exactly what I was the first night her son brought me to dinner. Then, the same words from March, from the gas pump in April, "Leave right now." I didn't move. I answered at the volume I use at 5:30. Pine. 1 beat. This is my building. There was nothing left for her to say. It was simply a fact, and she was standing in a building bearing another woman's name, having just ordered that woman to leave it. 90 people watched her understand that in the same instant she did. She went silent. Grady never said another word, not then, not for the rest of that day. From the seed pallets came the sound of a paper cup hitting the floor. Bristol stood there with Miles on her hip, staring at the second page, doing arithmetic nobody had to explain, because she'd swabbed that child herself. He told me it was just to settle something. Then she looked down at her son. Pine sank onto Doss's stool. I said nothing else. I left all 3 pages on the counter and took none of them back, because they were never for me. I lifted my daughter off my mother's hip and walked out the front door. My grandfather's bell rang, exactly as it has for 60 years. It doesn't know a thing about any of us. It only rings when somebody leaves. Grady withdrew the custody petition on May 12, 10 days, no hearing, no judge. The divorce finalized in November. He never asked for the store, since his own attorney had known since March the LLC was airtight. He was never charged. Lying under oath is a felony, Dayla said, but lying in your own living room is just a Saturday. He left Bellwood that August and works at a dealership in Ohio now, and I understand he's good at it. I believe that, because he always was. I didn't sell the store. I made Doss Merrill the manager, a real salary and a share of the profit on a 3-year contract. He read it twice, glasses down his nose, signed it, and handed it back. She'd have liked that online business. Nobody in Bellwood ever said a cruel word to Pine's face. That town does its quiet work in every direction. She stepped down from her church's hospitality committee that September. She's never apologized, and I've never waited for one. Bristol texted me one sentence on May 4th. I answered 4 months later, and it was hard. Miles and Marlo see each other a few times a year now, since those 2 babies never did anything wrong to anybody, and I've had to fight myself over that more than once. I'm still at Fort Campbell. Still 640 miles. I updated my family care plan, Grady's name off, my mother's name on as long-term caretaker, initialed by my commander on an ordinary Tuesday. That's the whole boundary. That's all it ever was. Those 3 pages sit in a small safe in my quarters, and I haven't looked at them since May 2nd. I haven't told Marlo any of it. There will be a day. It isn't today. She's a toddler, and the only thing she needs to understand about her family right now is who comes when she cries. That question has never once been complicated. People ask if it felt good. For about 4 days, it felt fantastic, and I won't perform some serenity I didn't have. Then I learned what nobody tells you beforehand. I never got those 7 weeks back. Nobody hands those back. What I got instead was simpler. I stopped needing a single person in that town to believe me. That turned out to be the only thing I ever won, and the only thing I needed. I didn't take my name back from Bellwood. I just stopped lending it to them. He stood in a room full of his own family and told them she wasn't his. And the one true part of that sentence, the part he never intended, is that she isn't anybody's. She's her own. And the only people who get to stand near her are the ones who show up when she cries. That's my story. 3 pages, 45 cents, and one question nobody could answer. If somebody ever hands you a document meant to end your life, read the last page first. The fine print at the bottom is where they're forced to keep the truth, because the law makes them put it somewhere. If you know someone who needs to hear that today, send this to them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.